Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me indicate that this is a hearing being held in public and it is being broadcast live, not only on the Parliament's channel, but on Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all here, to welcome my colleague members of this committee, to remind you that this is the public hearing of the Joint Select Committee on the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2018. And pursuant to the committee's mandate, we are considering this bill, and we are expected to report to the Parliament by May 27, 2019. I'd like to take this opportunity to specifically welcome the technocrats from the Ministry of Finance and from the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. Most of you, if not all of you, will know that I'm the chairman of this committee, Camille Robinson Regis. I'll invite the members of the committee to introduce themselves and then invite the witnesses to introduce themselves. I'd like to also indicate at this time that the committee is supported by officials of the Office of the Parliament and officials from the Attorney General's Office and the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. And we also have in our audience members of the Political Forum of Parties of Tobago and other technocrats from Tobago and interested persons from Tobago. So I'd welcome you all here and ask for the introductions now, please.
I'll start. Good morning, everyone. Nigel Freitas, member.
Good morning, all. Rujana Tindar Singh, member.
Good morning, all. Saddam Hussein, member.
Good morning, Foster Cummings, member.
Good morning, Maria Dillon Remy, member.
Good morning, Clarence Rambarat, member.
A very good morning, Fitzgerald Haynes, member.
Good morning, all. Terence Dial Singh, member.
Member.
Could I, yeah.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Suzette Taylor Lichi, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen of the viewing public. My name is Michelle Durham Kisoon, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance.
Good morning. My name is Narayan Charan. I'm the Assistant Director in the Economic Management Division, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, everybody. I am Sandra Sukram. I am the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning. I'm Garnet Samuel, Manager of Research Department at the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning. Giselle Samuel, Senior Legal Counsel, Central Bank, Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning. I am Janetta G. Ramsahai, Assistant Chief Parliamentary Counsel.
Good morning, Anil Joseph, Senior Parliamentary Counsel, Chief Parliamentary Counsel Office.
Good morning, Janelle Smith, Legal Officer 2, Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs.
Okay, thank you very much for those introductions. Let me again reiterate that we have representatives here from the Tobago Forum of political parties, as well as the Chief Administrator of the THA, and they are present in the audience, and I'd like to thank them and welcome them. Ladies and gentlemen, today's hearing is essentially to obtain expert opinion on the fiscal process and the fiscal proposals that are in the bill that is before us for our discussion. So I would like to commence the discussions by reminding both committee members and officials that they need to direct their questions and concerns through the chair, just for us to keep things very orderly. And I would also like to remind you that when you are speaking, please activate your microphones. And when you are finished speaking, please turn off your microphones. And I would like to know if you're ready now for us to proceed. Members? Yes, thank you very much. Please be reminded that the clauses that we'll be looking at are clauses 141 AD, 141 AE, 141 AF, 141 AI, 141 AJ, 141 AL, and any other general questions that you may want to propose. Could I ensure that everybody has the bill before them? All right. Okay, I'd like us, if we can, to if I may be allowed to start the ball rolling. I think one of the major questions that has occupied the committee is the question with regard to 141 AE. And that is in relation to the clause that indicates an appropriation in the minimum of 8% of expenditure being allocated to Tobago every financial year. That is that clause is found on page 40 of the bill, and that is one of the issues that has occupied the committee itself, and it is also an issue that was raised by some of the submissions that we got in relation to comments on the bill. It was also raised when we had our public hearing in Tobago. And I would really like to start by asking the Ministry of Finance if they have any comments or views on this clause in particular, because I think it represents one of the main pillars of the bill. And could I invite the Permanent Secretary if she has an opening statement? Because even though that's a question, it may be part of your opening statement. All right, so please go ahead.
Good morning again, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. The Ministry of Finance has provided written comments on certain aspects of the bill, and we welcome the opportunity to expand on these initial comments. We were asked specifically to focus on Clause 18, which proposes arrangements for finance and revenue sharing and for the establishment of a Fiscal Review Commission. However, we also have some comments on Clause 12, which my colleague P.S. Durham-Kissoon will share subsequently. Under the topic Fiscal Allocation to Tobago, Sections 141 AD and 141 AE sets the minimum budgetary allocation for Tobago at no less than 8% of the national budget. It is the view of the Ministry of Finance that details on how the formula was derived, including the data utilized, should be explicitly set out in a policy statement and be subject to periodic review. We also believe that the formula should be based on revenue estimates and not on expenditure, but of course we are open to, once we receive the data and get the details, we are open to discussion on this matter. It is also not clear whether the intention is that the revenues collected in Tobago or in Trinidad for the account of Tobago is to be netted out of the 8%, or whether it is in addition to the 8%. If the amount collected is to be in addition to the 8%, then we need to clearly set out what would be the accountability and reporting mechanisms and the process by which these funds would be appropriated for use in Tobago. Under the topic Fiscal Review Commission, Section 141 AD3 sets out the responsibilities of the Fiscal Review Commission established under Section 141AD1. However, further clarity is required on how the Fiscal Review Commission is to execute these responsibilities, given the fact that it seems to have no executive powers. One responsibility of the Fiscal Review Commission is to establish a mechanism for revenue sharing between the islands of Tobago and Trinidad. Again, it is not clear by what process this mechanism would be established. Certainly, we believe that this would entail considerable interaction with the Ministry of Finance and would require the Fiscal Review Commission on their part to have strong technical support. Also not clear is what would be the reciprocal mechanisms for revenue collected in Tobago for the account of Trinidad or for the account of the central government. Again, in looking at the revenue sharing system, a question to be addressed is how the revenue collected in Tobago will be accounted for and appropriated for expenditure, and whether the Tobago Island government would be able to spend beyond what was appropriated by Parliament in any one year. In addition, the accountable entities charged with ensuring that funds are spent in accordance with parliamentary appropriations must be identified. Regarding the revenue sharing system, the bill at Clause 141AD3C proposes that the Fiscal Review Commission develop a regime for sharing the revenue obtained from marine resources in the waters comprising each island and the marine boundaries subjacent, airspace, and telecommunications. The jurisdiction of the Tobago Island government over the coastal waters must be specified and clearly defined. Clarity is also required as to the definition of marine resources, marine boundaries, subjacent airspace, and telecommunications. Also, there may be a need to have an explicit reference to the treatment of oil and gas resources, given the importance of this sector to the economy. We believe that all matters relating to the revenue sharing mechanism should be set out in a policy paper that would underpin the legislation. Further, a further duty of the Commission under Section 141AD is to ensure that all companies operating in Tobago or which operate offices, branches, or do business in any other way in Tobago shall pay taxes in Tobago on such operations. Again, clarity is required here. Currently, taxes collected in Tobago are recorded by the Board of Inland Revenue and Customs and Excise Division and counted as part of total revenue of the central government. Our question is, how would the taxes collected in Tobago and held in Tobago be utilized? How will it be accounted for? Is it to be deducted from the 8% appropriation? Would the central government be able to utilize taxes raised in Tobago for any purpose, including the provision of services to Tobago? Also, by what means is the Commission to ensure that taxes are paid? Is the Commission to assume the enforcement and reporting functions of the Board of Inland Revenue? We support the view that taxes raised from institutions and individuals that have a presence in both jurisdictions is more effectively collected and administered at the level of the central government. Under the heading Retention of Monies Appropriated by Parliament, Section 141A1 provides that monies appropriated by Parliament to the Tobago Fund for the service of a financial year which remain unexpended at the end of the financial year shall be retained by the House of Assembly. Again, another question is, what are the accountability mechanisms with regard to the monies retained? The bill, as it currently stands, gives the impression that Parliament would have no oversight over these monies retained. And here we must underscore the fact that these are public funds and there's a duty to account both to the people of the Tobago Island government and to the people of the unified state of Trinidad and Tobago as to how these funds are utilized. Under the heading Borrowing, Section 141.8J, under Section 141.8J, the Tobago Executive Council is given almost unfettered power to borrow locally and internationally such sums as the Tobago Executive Council considers necessary for the discharge of its functions. The specific purpose for which the Council may borrow are for any purpose relevant to its functions under any written law, for the purpose of prudent management of its financial affairs, for the purpose of any investment as approved by the Tobago Executive Council, and for any purpose approved by the Tobago legislature. The question here is, what would be the legislative and regulatory framework that would govern the Tobago borrowing program? How would it be executed and managed? In total, there are about 12 different pieces of legislation under which the current government borrows and issues guarantee. The question needs to be addressed whether there would be new borrowing legislation for Tobago or whether the existing legislation would be amended to accommodate borrowing by Tobago. In addition to the governing legislation, the Ministry of Finance employs a very transparent process by which we structure, issue, and analyze RFPs for various types of financing and make a recommendation to Cabinet for the award of financing mandates. Alternatively, we have the option to utilize the central bank administered e-auction system to secure borrowings on the domestic market. We are also now able to record all aspects of each debt instrument in the entire debt portfolio on a centralized database that can be accessed by all relevant stakeholders, including the Central Bank, Treasury, and the Ministry of Finance. From that database, we are able to generate reports and analyze the debt portfolio, and this has really enhanced our capability to effectively manage the public debt. Another question is, what would be the equivalent processes in respect of Tobago's borrowing plan? What would be the nexus with the central government's borrowing plan? Another aspect of the borrowing relates to multilateral institutions. Borrowing from various multilateral institutions to which Trinidad and Tobago is a member is consequential to the country's membership in these organizations. What obtains now is that if there's a program or project in Tobago to be financed by a multilateral institution, the central government, as member of the institution, is the borrower on record, and the THA or the Tobago entity would be the executing agency. The question of whether the Tobago Island government would have direct access to multilateral financing and what would be required for this to happen is to be addressed. We also note that there may arise a moral hazard issue whereby lenders lend despite apparent risk because there is the belief, and generally rightfully so, that the borrowing is implicitly guaranteed by the central government. This makes it absolutely essential that there be sufficient oversight of any Tobago borrowing program by the central government. It should also be noted that any borrowing by the subnational government could potentially impact the credit ratings of the central government by increasing the level of risk in the debt portfolio. Accordingly, given the foregoing, we are of the view that any borrowing should be with the approval of the Minister of Finance and should give the Ministry of Finance a level of oversight regarding the processes utilized, as well as the opportunity to assess terms and conditions and examine potential risks and its impact on the overall debt portfolio. Madam Chairman, I'd like to turn over to my colleague to make a few other points, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that very comprehensive statement. I don't know if before you turn over to PS Durham Kisoon, if any of my colleagues would like to ask a question, because that was very comprehensive, that was very detailed. And I think there may be some issues that my colleagues may want to ask some clarification on. But, Mr. Diazing? Thank you very much. PS.
Thank you, Ms. Lichi. Ms. Lichi, the letter of June 4th, 2018, sent to the Secretariat by PS Dan Paul. I don't know if you have a copy of that. Right. Paragraph 3 of that letter on page 2, because it touches on what you just presented. I'll just wait until you get it. Have it? Great. Okay. So you spoke about tax collection in Tobago and so on and utilization. I want to ask you a question from a practical standpoint and from a business operation standpoint. So you have a holding company, I don't want to call any companies' names. You have a holding company based in Trinidad, publicly traded, that produces and publishes consolidated accounts in the newspapers, and they pay taxes on that. Various divisions may be profit-making, loss-making, whatever, but you consolidate everything. So you have this holding company in Trinidad and with subsidiaries. One subsidiary sells cars, one subsidiary does construction, and so on and so on. And then that subsidiary, which is a company in its own right, has a division in North Trinidad, a division in South Trinidad, selling cars, for example, and a division in Tobago. How do you anticipate that subsidiaries like that pay taxes in Tobago when these companies are publicly traded and produce consolidated accounts?
As I would have indicated in my opening statement, it would be very difficult for companies that straddle both jurisdictions to pay taxes to hive off a part of the taxes payable attributed to Tobago. So our position is that once the company or the individual straddles both jurisdictions, then the taxes should rightfully be collected in the central government, and that is so in most jurisdictions that have this sort of structure.
Well, you've cleared that in my mind. Thank you very much.
Good morning again. Senator De Freitas is the name. From the standpoint of either the central bank or the Ministry of Finance, do you have any information or data disaggregated in a way where you can get information in relation to Tobago? So things like number of businesses in Tobago, revenue that is generated in Tobago, or just generally the contribution of Tobago in terms of revenue generating potential or what is being generated now? Because it seems to me that everything is in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, and it cannot be broken down to Tobago and Trinidad. Do you all have anything like that in the Ministry of Finance or Central Bank?
Well, in the Ministry of Finance, certainly we can say how the amount, the portion of the taxes that was collected in Tobago, because there's a set-off process that happens. So we are able to say, from a revenue standpoint, how much revenue was collected in Tobago. What we would not be able to say is if these taxes were paid by Tobagonians, because basically you can pay taxes anywhere. So if a Trinidadian pays taxes in Tobago, that would come from Tobago's taxes.
But is it normal for a Trinidadian to pay taxes in Tobago?
No, it's not normal. I mean, I don't know, but it's possible.
Okay, but from a business standpoint, if someone has a business that's national, so they have departments or buildings in Tobago and in Trinidad, won't that entity know what revenue is being generated in Tobago within the context of their business? So they will know exactly how much sales they have in Tobago, because at the business level, it should be disaggregated at that point. So the information can come. You can break it down to say, well, I've generated X amount of money in Tobago, and therefore I'm paying X amount of taxes. Can that information be pulled out so that you can get exactly the information you need to make these kinds of decisions as it relates to Tobago?
Yes, I suppose the information can be generated. It would require a level of consultation, and we can do it, but...
Chair, just permit me. Sorry?
Just 1 minute.
Sorry.
Mr. Hines.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just following on the question put by my colleague, Mr. Dial, saying in respect of the holding company arrangement and its subsidiaries in Tobago, and the Ministry of Finance's view that the taxes should, for a matter of convenience, I take it, come to the central government, does that obviate, following on Mr. De Freitas's question, the responsibility or the possibility of making that portion that was due to Tobago available to it at some stage? In other words, put simply, the Ministry of Finance's view in the context of Mr. Dayal Singh was as a matter of convenience. But that does not mean in principle that Tobago is not entitled to that portion of the revenue. Am I correct?
Yes, you are.
And a mechanism can be found for dealing with that after the convenience of collecting it local in Trinidad.
Yes, it can.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Mr. Dayal Singh, I know you're eager to ask a question, but is it a follow-up? Okay,
Thank you. Following up on the same question again, and Mr. De Freitas's comments, again, it goes on to how holding companies and conglomerates do their accounts. You may have a division in Tobago that is loss-making, and those losses, P.S. Leachy can correct me, are netted off against profits from another company. So it's not as easy to say a company in Tobago is making money, you pay taxes there. What about the division in Tobago that is losing money? So that is why the whole concept of centrally collecting taxes, I think there has to be a firm statement on it. And it's not a matter of convenience, it's a matter of practicality and how these large publicly traded companies are run. I don't know if Ms. Leachy is in agreement or not.
Yes, I am in agreement.
Thank you.
Could I just, I'm going to go to Mr. Indar Singh, but can I ask that we ask questions rather than trying to, we can deliberate on these issues after, but seeing that we have our witnesses here, if we could ask questions so that we could have a better understanding of where we're going. Mr. Indar Singh.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Leachy, in relation to Clause 141 AE, you indicated in relation to the minimum appropriation of 8% of the expenditure, you pointed in the direction that the ministry was of the opinion that it should be reviewed. And how often is the ministry of that opinion?
Well, firstly, we are of the view that we need to understand how the formula was derived, because and secondly, as with most things, we think we haven't decided, we haven't discussed a specific period for review, but I think once there's a formula and there are parameters set, which is subject to change, then there should be a review. But we have not gone the step to say, but it should be every 4 years, 3 years, 2 years.
And the ministry is of the opinion that which entity, or there should be a coming together of entities to conduct this review?
Yes, I think it should be a collaborative approach.
Identifying specific stakeholders, or?
Yes, certainly the Fiscal Review Commission, as well as the Ministry of Finance and any other stakeholders that may be agreed and identified.
You okay?
Just for clarification, in terms of the idea of Tobago House of Assembly being able to borrow, and I'm trying to compare it to other state enterprises now within the context of what they can do within the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Could you just identify what are the rules and regulations regarding borrowing for state enterprises?
So there are two types of state enterprise and statutory authorities borrowing. There's government guaranteed borrowing and there's non-government guaranteed borrowing. In the case of the non-government guaranteed borrowings, those are conducted by state enterprises that have strong balance sheets, so NGC, a few others. These companies, when they they have to come to the Minister of Finance for approval to borrow. And the investment division would scrutinize the plans and the borrowings, and then the minister would give approval to borrow. In the case of the government guaranteed borrowings, the request is made to the Ministry of Finance, a note is prepared to Cabinet to request the borrowing. Once Cabinet gives us the authority to go ahead and arrange the borrowing, the Ministry of Finance issues RFPs or does the e-auction in collaboration with the central bank. We set the terms and conditions. We look at our overall debt maturity profile to see what we can, what tenor we can apply to the borrowing. We scrutinize so we send out the RFPs requesting specific. Sometimes we give a rate, we give a tenor, requesting specific terms and conditions. We analyze the RFPs once they come in, and we recommend to the Minister of Finance and Cabinet which institution should be awarded the mandate. That recommendation goes to Cabinet. Once it is approved by Cabinet, we send out the notification to the bank and the state enterprises and the state enterprise that the mandate has been awarded, and we continue to work with the bank and the state enterprise to ensure that the documentation is finalized and ultimately that the guarantee is issued.
So do you envision a model that could be developed to allow the Tobago House of Assembly, in keeping with what is required for the bill that is before us? Do you envision a model could be developed to allow the Tobago House of Assembly to borrow, ensuring that the regulations are in place and in keeping with the fact that there's a central government and a Tobago House of Assembly? Because I want to envision that the Tobago House of Assembly is different from a state enterprise, and the reason for borrowing obviously would be different in that regard. You're dealing with an island full of people, and it is for the betterment of those individuals why the THA would request borrowing for developmental needs, etc., etc. So do you envision that a model could be developed based on what is available now under the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to allow the THA to borrow given what they want to achieve in the bill that is before us?
Yes, I think that a model can be developed, but I think there will always have to be a reference or recourse to the central government because of the potential contagion of borrowing that may be risky. So if short-term borrowings, too much short-term borrowings, the currency in which the loan is borrowed, we have to look at the overall debt maturity profile, because we have to consider if there was to be a default and government was to have to step in, can we afford to step in at that point when there might be a default? So there always will have to be a reference to the central government. But certainly a model can be developed.
Madam Pierce, just in relation to that issue of default, what impact could a default have on the credit rating of of the government of Trinidad and Tobago? And by extension, the macroeconomic stability of Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, we can be placed on notice. We can be placed on notice for downgrade. Some of our loan documentation, if there's a default, it can have an impact on some of the existing borrowings that we have. Might be called, there might be some sort of acceleration, right? So yeah, so it's just basically that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Hines.
So in short, Madam Lychee, we can design a formula for the SNG to borrow money without any reference to any state enterprise of any type. We can devise a formula but ensure, for obvious reasons, the impact on the national debt profile and the implications for that, including that, or taking that into account, we can design a model for borrowing by Tobago in the new dispensation. And without any reference, this is what I want to specify, without any reference to any state enterprise. We could do that.
Could you clarify what is meant by any reference to state enterprise?
Well, to be quite frank, there is some discussion taking place long before you came here today about whether Tobago could borrow and state enterprises can, and you just differentiated between the strong ones like the NGCs and those that require cabinet approval and the process you outlined. And because I'm aware that that discussion is taking place, I'm asking, because that is what creates some of the emotions in this. This is a highly emotive topic, you know. So I just wanted to clarify that we can design a model for Tobago in the new dispensations borrowing without any reference to those, but of course taking into account the national government's concern in relation to borrowing. That's all.
Yes, but the point I was making in this statement about what would be the legislative authority, because like I said, there's about 12 different pieces of legislation under which government borrows. So if the central government wants to do a bond on the local market, we are under the Development Loans Act.
Right.
If it wants to issue a guarantee to state enterprises, it's the State Enterprise Guarantee of Loans Act.
Yeah.
If we want to go external, it's the External Loans Act. And my question is, what is the underlying legislative and regulatory framework that would... So we can design a process, but
Right.
there has to be
Yeah, so when you design the process, it of necessity must fit within one of those 12 existing categories of government or of national borrowing.
Yes, and a further complication is that the Ministry of Finance is currently reviewing the debt legislation to sort of streamline and modernize the whole suite of legislation related to debt.
May I thank you?
Yes.
Mr. Hines, just a minute, Dr. Dialsingh. Yes, may I ask a question? Is it therefore possible for the Ministry of Finance to design what you're talking about for Tobago and perhaps present it to the committee as a possible policy document for our consideration? Yes, you look like you don't want to answer right now.
I'm just thinking of our capacity constraints.
I understand that.
Yes, it is possible. We'll see.
But I understand
Yes.
what you mean. All right, but we will look at that possibility and perhaps be able to give some support. Thank you. Dr. Dialsingh.
P.S., are you saying that the present system you have of borrowing is not working efficiently, that you need to go back and reevaluate it?
No, I'm just saying that as with most of the legislation in Trinidad, it's fairly old, and there is room for updating. But I think it's worked well. It's working well for us. But I think what is missing is for us to set the public debt in a more strategic manner. So to have a medium-term debt strategy, to be able to take into account the various types of borrowing, because we are very much limited to very much plain vanilla type borrowing because of the legislation, which may be a good thing. So it's basically just to modernize it and to just, be able to just set the borrowings in a more strategic manner.
So then it may be easy as you're doing that procedure to also develop one, as Mr. Hines suggested, for the Tobago's needs.
Yes, we're working with the Commonwealth Secretariat in that exercise, and I suppose we can add a little bit to the
Part of, as I say, part of the, the concerns I have, as you mentioned, that if Tobago borrows and goes into debt, it will affect us as the joint nation.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to have some system where we can get, feedback from Tobago adequately.
Yeah.
Is the Tobago House of Assembly, is the THA providing up-to-date, annual audit reports?
Dr. Dr. Dayal Singh, I think it will be not within the Ministry of Finance's remit to answer that. There will be an opportunity for us to talk to the Auditor General on this entire issue, so I would not permit that question. Do you have any other questions? Dr. Dayal Singh, any other questions? Okay. Mr. Cummings, could I just remind the committee that we still have a number of people. We still have the PS Durham Kisoon, and I'm sure the central bank would have quite a number of things that they need to say. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. To Mrs. Leachy. In your presentation, you were speaking about the 8% and the collection of taxes. I was trying to get an opinion from you in terms of the taxes collected. I think you mentioned that there's a net off position, but what is your view on the taxes collected and in addition to the 8%, whether it should be retained in Tobago or netted off? What is your view on that?
Well, I think absent of information on how the formula was, how the 8% was derived, as well as the data that supported that, it would be difficult to say whether the 8% should be netted off of the taxes collected or vice versa. So I think the key is for the information, to get the information, and then we'll be able to make an informed decision or have an informed opinion. I was just raising the question because it's not clear in the legislation. Yes, so there was mention that there would be 8% allocated, and then there was a mention also that taxes collected in Tobago would remain for the account of Tobago, but it wasn't clear the nexus between the two, whether that was in addition to the 8% or whether it was to be netted out of the 8%. It's netted out. Okay. It's basically the taxes are collected in Tobago, and there is a book transaction that would record it as coming into the consolidated fund and going back out to Tobago. So it physically remains in Tobago, but in the books it comes into the consolidated fund and then gets sent back to Tobago. Yes. 4.
It's 4. But could I remind us that in the bill itself, it speaks about physical separation, isolation, absence of a multiplier effect, and restricted opportunities for Tobagonians as the reasoning for the increase in the yearly appropriations and so on. It was said that those were the reasons. So I don't know if we would need further clarification in terms of what is meant by this. I don't know if the Ministry of Finance or even the central bank has any thoughts on those reasons. And then Mr. Hines wants to ask a question. And then, if I may, use the chairman's prerogative and ask that we allow PS Durham Kisoon to make her statement after. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to be able to assist the Commission on their deliberations. Regarding the Tobago allocation of funds, we also were wondering, because there was no information in the bill itself, and I don't expect that it would have been there, maybe as an appendix or something, but we were also wondering how was the 8% derived. So maybe it was a projection of expenditures and revenues, which would have provided which would have informed the figure of 8%. And maybe if we could see something that tells us, okay, this was a projection, these are the projected expenditure and revenues, to address all the items you called out just now, Madam Chair. Then we're able to say, well, okay, this is a good assessment of, this provides a good assessment for this 8% figure that we have.
I think that is something that we will ask the forum to provide us with. Because it is, as I said when I opened, it is an issue that has been occupying the minds of committee members and other stakeholders. So we need to look at that. Mr. Samuel, you wanted to say something? But you look like if you're eager to. No. All right, Mr. Hines, you still wanted to ask a question?
Opportunity. Madam PS, at the moment, and this is for clarity, at the moment, there is a set of arrangement for Tobago receipts as against the 4%. Is there, as we speak?
Yes.
There is. And secondly, in percentage terms, are you able now to indicate what percentage of their receipts, 4%, accounts for revenue in Tobago at the moment in percentage terms?
I should be able to get that information, but I don't have it with me currently, but I think we would be able to get it.
On the rough, it is minuscule.
Yes, yes, it would be.
In respect of the 4%? Mm-hmm. All right. That's good enough for the time being. Thank you.
Mr. Hussain.
Much.
Only because you're the youngest one here. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With respect to the bill, this is a question for Central Bank. There's the establishment of a contingency fund at the proposed clause 141AH of the bill. Are there any concerns with regards to the establishment of the contingency fund?
There are no concerns, but we noted in our written response to the ministry that the existing THA Act has no prior section which details such a fund. And we are saying going forward, in coming up with this contingency fund, there must be some clearly established guidelines for the application, the approval, and the distribution and expenditure of the funds for these extraordinary expenditures.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow-up question based on Member Hines's comments. I am curious because we've had a dispute resolution commission 20 plus years ago, which has identified a particular percentage of the national budget to go to Tobago based on the formula that they used then. And before us, we have a formula being used that has come up with 8%. What I have not heard, and I could be wrong, and the Central Bank might be able to help me here, within the data that comes out of the Central Bank, has anyone at any particular point in time tried to figure out what is the revenue generating potential of Tobago?
Thank you for the question. No, we have not specifically tried to isolate what is the revenue generating potential of Tobago. In fact, at the Central Bank, we look very generally at monetary and financial issues in terms of the research we do. That's our main focus. So we have not looked specifically at Tobago individually in terms of its revenue.
But you understand where that information, in the context of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, can be quite helpful. Let me just give you an example. So there's an archipelago that we have. There are other Caribbean nations, Barbados, St. Lucia, Grenada. All of these countries, as sovereign as they are, would have revenue generating potential. They generate by themselves a certain amount of money based on whatever industry they're involved in, most likely tourism. Tobago, being a part of a unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago, you must be able to extrapolate, using whatever economic formulas you can, the revenue generating potential of Tobago. Because let me just give you an example of what that data can do. So we are asking for 8% right now. And after all of your formulas and your projections, you may realize that Tobago has a revenue generating potential that is 20% of the national budget. You realize what kind of disservice is happening to Tobago if it is we're only collecting 4%, but their revenue generating potential indicates that they can generate 20% of the national budget. Obviously, that's biased to one side because it could also go the other way. But you understand just having that data, how it helps in terms of assessing the contributions to Tobago to allow it to develop. Because we may be in a situation where the development of Tobago being stifled, we are only hurting ourselves by way of Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm asking the central bank, after all of these years of our independence and the unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago, can we not finally get some data on the revenue generating potential of Tobago? Because we may just be figuring out what we're missing out on. Is that something that could be undertaken?
Yes, it is a viable project. I don't think it will be beyond us. But as I said before, we have focused specifically on monetary, well, principally on specifically on financial policy, which is within the remit of the central bank. We have looked at fiscal issues to the extent that they affect what we're doing in the central bank. And if we are required to do such a project, I mean, we would definitely undertake it. It is something that we can do. But at this point in time, and in the past, we have not focused on specific revenue issues related to Tobago individually. But I understand your concern, and I know that it can be pretty helpful in exercises such as these. But I believe the Tobago House of Assembly, well, has a research section, and they might have been doing some of that research.
Thank you very much. I think that's something that the Ministry of Planning could also engage in. So I'll ask the Minister of Planning to look at that possibility. Dr. Diyal Singh, is it a burning question that you must ask? All right. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm understanding that I'm being advised that all questions are burning. So Dr. Diyal Singh, please. And after this burning question, can I ask the committee to allow P.S. Durham Kisoon to speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Developing on the question that Mr. De Freitas, asked about the fact that you're looking at an 8%, and we're looking at in the future, if Tobago has a greater earning potential. Let's project sometime in the future, oil is not in the equation, natural gas is not in the equation. Tobago is doing excellent in tourism. Could we in Trinidad now reverse that situation where we get an 8% from Tobago? Would that be something in the formula? No, I'm saying way in the future, the countries where you're united, in a nation, in our formula, 30, 40 years in the future, I would like to get something from Tobago if they have a 20% earning potential. I'm just putting that out.
Yeah, saying I'm not good. You see, that was really a burning question. And I would just like to say that yes, the tables will turn and we will have a Trinidad bill, in all fairness. So, P.S. Durham Kisoon.
Thank you, Chair. This section of this statement continues from P.S. Leachy's initial statement, and it really touches on the section of the bill that deals with state enterprises and statutory authorities, which actually is section 12(4) of the bill. Some of the questions did touch on state enterprises, but this section, it begs certain questions. It proposes that where a statutory authority or a state enterprise provides services in Tobago, that authority or enterprise shall, in providing services, act in accordance with the policies or programs of the Tobago Island government. The question is, we need clarification on whether this will embrace existing national policies for adherence to corporate governance standards and fiduciary responsibilities of accounting and revenue, for revenue and expenditure. not forgetting, of course, demonstration of transparency in procurement. Currently, Section 66A, sub C and D of the Constitution requires submission of annual administrative reports to the Parliament by statutory authorities and state enterprises. I'm asking, how will this be addressed going forward? Another issue is, will these policies referred to in Section 12 sub 4 include risk mitigation measures, such as submission of audited annual financial statements for the scrutiny of an oversight body? As we are aware, scrutiny of financial statement provides useful information and sends important signals on the financial health of an organization. Is there or will there be an overarching policy governing the entrance into debt, as raised by my colleague, by a statutory authority or state enterprise? And I think my colleague mentioned certain pieces of legislation, and in particular with state enterprises, the Guarantees Loan Companies Act applies. These borrowings are currently, as my colleague stated, negotiated by the Minister of Finance on behalf of enterprises. What about non-guaranteed debt? What is the policy governing a company entering into long-term or even short-term debt? Will there be a requirement of the approval of the Minister of Finance as currently prevails? If not, will there be a requirement for conducting due diligence? Where will it reside to reduce the risk of an entity overextending itself? Moving from Section 12 sub 4, in Section 141AK, we note that it proposes to give the Tobago Executive Council the power to invest for any purpose relevant to its functions. This committee may wish to note that while investment in financial instruments may prove more risky, particularly for institutions that may not be nimble enough to react in instances of gains and losses, will the Tobago Island government consider it useful to adopt for statutory authorities and state enterprises a corresponding policy on acquisition of significant assets, not only to safeguard expenditure, but in keeping to be consistent with international standards, particularly when treating with issues of anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism? Additionally, clarification is needed on whether, with respect to these entities, whether there will be a policy framework for the remuneration of boards of directors and terms and conditions governing the employment of staff. Will these policies safeguard the subventions transferred to these entities against a disproportionate expenditure on salaries and benefits over expenditure on desired project outputs? In closing, we recommend that a comprehensive policy paper be developed to clarify the intent of the bill on all financial matters, as well as outline the processes for implementation of the various aspects of the bill. And we thank you for the opportunity for making this statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, PS. If I may, I think based on what both PSs said, it looks as though we have to ask the forum for policy paper on quite a number of these issues that have been raised, because we need some clarity as it relates to these issues in particular. It is clear that the financial issues which really underpin this legislation can have some effects that we may not want if we don't have a clear policy statement on this. And I think we may need to have, we will have to make that request of the forum. Are there any questions. Mr. Dialsing.
Thank you. Chair, previously I had directed my question on to PS.
Just sorry to cut you. Could I also ask before you
Sure.
continue? Does the central bank have a statement that they would also like to make? I wouldn't ask you to make it now, but I'll ask Mr. Dialsing to ask his question, but I'm just asking.
There's no specific statement. What we were going to do is answer questions and also speak to what we addressed in our written comments
Okay,
today.
I'd appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mr. Dialsing.
So my question dealt with the Ministry of Finance's response to Section 141 AD. I now want to turn to the central bank's response to the same section, Section 141 AD. So I will ask Ms. Sukram to get the central bank letter, which is, and I'm dealing with paragraph 1, bullet point 5. Now, when I was asking P.S. Leachy, I think there was agreement that taxes will be collected centrally, correct? Now, the central bank is saying, bullet point 5, ensuring that all companies operating in Tobago or which operate offices, branches, or do business in any other way in Tobago shall pay taxes in Tobago on such operations. So the Ministry of Finance has a view. Central bank has another view. Yeah.
That's what the bill.
Yeah.
That's what the bill proposes,
Yeah.
and that's not
Yeah.
what the central bank is saying.
So yeah. So I'm flagging this as an issue that we need to have some agreement on between the parties. That's all.
Okay, are there any other questions? Central Bank, you would like to say something on this?
Madam Chair, I must say, I was not too, I didn't understand exactly what the minister was asking. But he referred to subsection 141 AD, which deals with the Fiscal Review Commission. So what we were saying is that we had a broad statement, meaning that it is expected that the regulations would be developed outlining the composition and structure of the Fiscal Review Commission. To be a little bit more granular, we were looking at what are the goals of the commission, what is the accountability of the commission. These are the things that we were thinking of when we wrote this broad statement, and what are the powers to enforce, because I don't know if that I see in the bill, or we see the bill, any executive or legislative powers of this commission. And then finally, we also would have liked to see, or at some point, what is the expertise of the members of this committee? Will there be some framework put in place where we say, okay, there's going to be lawyers, accountants, economists, etc., that is going to form this commission?
So, Chair, if I may clarify the question. When you look at the bill on page 38, section 141 AD, and subsections D and E, the simple question is, what the bill is proposing, is it practicable in accounting terms for conglomerates? For conglomerates who have divisions in Tobago to pay taxes on those divisions in Tobago, as opposed to paying corporate taxes into the Ministry of Finance in Trinidad.
Minister, similar to what the ministry is saying, once there's a way that you can disaggregate the revenues coming in from the companies, the branches of the various companies, then there's no, it will be possible to do so.
Yes, Mr. Hussain.
To any person, any panel, just for my own knowledge, can you all indicate right now, currently, what exists in terms of the revenues in which the THA keeps for itself or collects, in terms of taxes, duties, or is it everything goes into the consolidated funds?
Well, I can speak to the major taxes, the customs duty, as well as the Board of Inland Revenue taxes that are paid in Tobago. They're paid in Tobago, but like I said, it's physically retained, but the recording of it is that it would come into the consolidated fund and then go back out. I'm not sure about the smaller taxes, and certainly we can, if it's required, we can get that information for you.
That will be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Dr. Remy?
Thank you. To the either central bank or the Ministry of Finance. Again, in relation to the guidelines, the central bank did submit a statement in which you said that guidelines and limits should be established in relation to the power to borrow. This is the THA's power to borrow, given the impact that it may have on the national credit rating and standard, and that was also mentioned by the Ministry of Finance. There was another opinion sought by the committee, and there were concerns about that you can, well, not concerns, statements made that the measures that could be implemented to offset the risks could include enforcing borrowing limits, setting guidelines for long-term borrowing, restricting borrowing to local currency, thus avoiding exchange fluctuation rates, and creating an independent body to oversee and monitor subnational borrowing. These were some of the suggestions that were made. I'm just asking, based on what was said about the current borrowing, that is the guidelines guidelines that affect how national borrowing is occurring right now, what would you recommend that would be put in place to guide the borrowing for the Tobago House of Assembly?
As I would have mentioned before, I think a decision has to be made on what would be the legislative authority underlying the borrowings. So is it that all of the pieces of that legislation would be amended to accommodate borrowing in Tobago? Also, the Fiscal Review Commission, or whoever is charged with effecting the borrowing, would have to have the appropriate personnel in place and processes in place. And there would have to be very close collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, because the borrowing in the Ministry of Finance, before we can decide on a tenor or a rate, we look at our debt maturity profile. We look at where we can afford to borrow. If you contract borrowing outside of having that knowledge of the debt portfolio, then you can agree to a borrowing that would be risky. Because, for example, if we have a huge maturity in 3 years' time, but you in isolation, you're looking at a 3-year bond or 3-year borrowing that has a low interest rate. The question is, the government as a whole or the country as a whole will not be able to support, or it should not contract further debt in that maturity. So there always has to be a relation to the central government. There also has to be a commitment to share information on the loan portfolio, because, like I said, we have made a lot of strides in recording debt. We have a shared database between the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, the Treasury, where we have a good handle on the debt service due, on the terms and conditions of loans. We can do projections. So if there's to be a Tobago borrowing program, there has to be a decision on how it will be integrated into that database, because the key to effective public debt management is is the information to know where your risks lie. So there has to be a nexus with the Ministry of Finance. There has to be the requisite legislative authority in place. The processes have to be agreed. So I won't be in a position now to say exactly what the process should be, but certainly these are the major tenets.
And based on what was discussed before, mentioned by Minister Hines, these are things that could be put in place as you are looking at actually as Tobago is now, the bill is now being considered. Whatever needs to be put in place to ensure that the borrowing happens in the way that would account for what Tobago's needs and fitting in with the national guidelines, that could be done and done now. That's what you're saying, that can happen.
Yes, it can happen. I think it would be most effective if there's some sort of expert external support, which, like I said, as we look at our existing debt legislation, we're working with the Commonwealth Secretariat, who have helped us in strengthening the recording and management system. So I would think that, yes, it can happen, but I feel to be effective and timely, we should also identify some sort of strong external support to help in that.
Thanks again, Madam Chair. Earlier on, you indicated that you would have liked a little bit more information as to how we came up with the 8%, or how the 8% came about. So I'll just give you some information on that based on correspondence that we received, so that you'll have a greater understanding as to why the 8%. It came from the Forum of Political Parties. So it says, looking ahead, we believe the THA should be allocated 8% of the national budget to compensate for the historical underfunding of its development budget. The case for 8% is premised on several factors. The principal factor is explained by a critical examination of the construct of the bandwidth of the DRC ruling. It is evident that the spread between the minimum share of 4.03% and the upper limit of 6.9% is 2.87, which was designated as the developmental component of the budgetary allocation. The minimum share of 4.03% was derived based on Tobago's share of the national population at that time. However, given that Tobago's population is now about 5% of the national population, and if we provide for a developmental component of 3%, that gives you 8%. It is instructive to note that in the years post the DRC ruling, the growth rate of the Tobago population was faster than that of the nation as a whole. A fixed share is recommended at this time to provide some degree of predictability necessary for the planning and execution of programs and projects as Tobago attempts to catch up to national development. We ultimately would prefer that allocations be based on economic considerations for the nation as a whole. That is why the Fiscal Review Commission is proposed. The intention is for it to deal appropriately with the national economic situation of which Tobago is an integral part. That will ultimately eliminate the need for the stipulated minimum percentage. The proposal for a single point subvention is made against the backdrop of a historical 2% of budget remittance prior to 2000, when DRC ruled in favor of the 4.03 to 6.9% range. When this bandwidth was implemented, it languished at the 4% threshold. Given the historical circumstance of parliamentary allocations to Tobago, the request for a single point subvention would ensure a level of reasonable appropriation and predictability that would assist cohesive and realistic planning for national development. So that is the reason given as to why the 8% is being requested. Do you have any comments now that you know?
Madam Chair, well,
you have the document.
Yes, we would have been
pages
provided
5 and
with this
6.
document and previously as well. But as technocrats, I think we required further detail. So you break down, we would want a discussion on the components of the 3% development percentage, for example. We would also want recourse to the data, the supporting data, the statistics, So it's basically just to build out the formula in a clear and precise manner.
But
So
it's, based on what they're saying here, it seems that the formula didn't really change from what the DRC used. It's changed because the population of Tobago grew. And still utilizing that 3% in terms of developmental budgetary allocation, they just added the 2 and came up with 8%. So the data that you're looking for may already exist by way of what was deliberated in the Dispute Resolution Commission to come up with the 3% in the first place. And then, well, the 4.06% is just really the population at that point in time. So are you able to acquire that information by way of the DRC's deliberations? This would have been 20 years ago. I'm sure it's somewhere.
Well,
Probably in the parliamentary archives.
Okay. We are the Ministry of Finance, sorry. We haven't been able to locate any information on the formula.
Perhaps the THA may have something in their archives. So we will ask. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. De Freitas. Are there any other questions? Dr. Dialsing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. Not so much a question, a concern I have really, because my colleague, Dr. Remy, actually, asked about the formula that may be used to, to offset any borrowing that, we may have concerns. And we are looking at the state enterprises there, what mechanisms in place there, and the proposed improvements that you would get for any state enterprises want to be actually borrowing. But, looking back at certain state enterprises, I think there's a lot to be desired in some cases. We've seen horse overruns and whatnot. We have seen, like, a runaway horse in certain instances. My fear, Madam Chair, is if we don't get this, a proper structure in place, with all the optimism we may have of creating a formula, we may be creating a financial black hole where money will be going in, and there may be no way to have a check and balance to see how we can stop it. So I think a concern I have is to really formulate something that hopefully would work.
Thank you, Dr. Diaz. Madam Pierce, you would like to comment in any way?
Thank you, member. Yes, you're right. There has been some issues with state enterprises, and in this very chamber, we've had several discussions on several state enterprises where performance was less than expected. And in those cases, there is a policy document, and there is a monitoring mechanism for those state enterprises, and yet there are challenges. So what we're putting to the table is that in the case of Tobago Island government, that they may build on what currently exists and establish at least the minimum of the monitoring mechanisms that currently prevails, so that the challenges that we currently experience may not be translated in this new regime. All right, there is an opportunity to learn from mistakes that are made. There has been proposals which we embrace to put the policy document that we subscribe to into legislation. Right now, the policy, there's no legislative mechanism to enforce what we currently monitor. Maybe this is an opportunity so that state enterprises in Tobago there may be better control by building in, based on a policy, a firm policy, into the legislative framework. So the questions that we have raised is really with a view to putting on the table various policies that could be shaped so that state enterprises in Tobago could flourish. So thank you for the question, Member.
Thank you very much for that answer. I just wanted to remind members that we do have the input of an expert in fiscal federalism, and that all of that type of information that he has provided to us will be provided so that we can also look at these things in the context of what his suggestions and recommendations are. And I do believe copies were provided to members and the witnesses. Professor Stetler's comments. Yeah, okay. Are there any other questions? No. Could I ask the central bank to make their input now, please? The central bank had provided us with some comments previously, and if you could expand on those if you so desire. I think one of the burning issues is two main issues: the issues of the contingency fund and how that will be overseen, and the power to borrow, which keeps rearing its head, and what effect the borrowings can have on the credit rating for the country of Trinidad and Tobago. And the issue of the financial rules. So I'll ask the central bank to make their input now, please.
So thanks, Madam Chair. What I will do is not go through things that were already raised, in the sense that if there's something that we were trying to say, sorry, not trying to, that we were that was not raised before, I will just address it. So I'll start with the contingency fund. I responded to a member indicating that a contingency fund will be very useful, of course, as it is useful in Trinidad and Tobago. But again, the way this fund is going to be administered, there must be some clear and precise ways of how it's going to be approved, at what point do you access the fund, and what is the expenditure projection for the fund. So there, in short, there must be some clear guidelines as to how this fund is to be used. So basically, we would like to see an elaboration of some of the characteristics of the fund and moving forward. The power to borrow. What we did is that we raised some issues that would be relevant when it comes to the provisions, subsection 41 AJ, power to borrow. We noted that the terms upon which Tobago will be able to borrow as an entity will be influenced by its credit rating. And we pointed out in our document, our written comments, that this credit rating, apart from being partly influenced by the credit rating of Trinidad and Tobago, we noted that in April 2017, Moody's Investors Services changed the outlook from stable to negative, partly because of the credit rating downgrade for Trinidad and Tobago. And this is what we talk when we speak and we allude to the borrowing of Tobago. It is highly and it will be influenced by whatever happens in Trinidad. So the assigned rating, Moody, I think they highlighted that it was highly dependent upon the strong level of oversight by Trinidad and Tobago and the approval that the THA required from the central government to contract financial long-term debt. So in raising that, we are saying that although there are no express limits on borrowing, the borrowing power of Tobago in the Act itself, it is expected that some procedural safeguards would be put in place when Tobago is borrowing, and there should be strong consideration given to the economic parameters. For instance, the debt to GDP ratio or the debt to revenue ratio of Tobago must be established to ensure that the debt itself remains manageable. And we close by saying that given the very integrated nature of the economies of Tobago and Trinidad, any expenditure in Tobago resulting from borrowing could, of course, impact the financial and the monetary environment in Trinidad. So we strongly advise that there must be, and as the ministry was pointing out, there must be a close collaboration and fiscal coordination between the two islands to ensure that the objectives for which they are borrowing, the fiscal objectives of the objectives of fiscal policy are achieved in the borrowing. To do with financial rules, it is expected that the formulation of financial rules would be subject to scrutiny and by the Parliament, of course, and it will also be prudent for the financial management, that is, financial management of Tobago legislature be subject to a review by a joint select committee of Parliament. So basically, what will these financial rules cover? Given that we would have liked to see some idea of what these financial rules are, given that the basics for regulating Tobago's public finances are also set out in certain sections of this bill. So it will be good to see what these actual financial rules are when they are formulated. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Dr. Dialsing, you have a question?
I just wanted one question. You mentioned that the Moody's, we were downgraded, right? Huh? Sorry? The THA? Yeah. So it's not Trinidad and Tobago on the whole has been downgraded by the Moody's?
So
Explain.
that was just that was an example of how we need to be able, that was done on the THA itself, Tobago House of Assembly. There was a Moody rating in 2017.
And do you know why it was downgraded?
Yeah, we said they said that it was downgraded because of partly because of the credit rating downgrade for Trinidad and Tobago, and it was owing to the material impact of sustained low energy prices and declining production from maturing oil and gas fields.
So they were so they were downgraded because of their attachment to us. So if Tobago stands alone, it may be possible that they may be getting a better grading than in future.
Well, they will take into consideration all that they examine when they come to the island. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Just to indicate that this bill is being done within the context of the unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago. Just to reiterate that. Okay, within the... Mr. Charles, I see you shaking your head. It is being done within the context of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, Mr. Charles. And I think on that note, could I indicate that we have mics, and if members of the Forum of Political Parties would like to ask any questions, I think we can allow for that now. I noticed that Senior Counsel Gilbert Peterson is not here, and that has me a little nervous. Thank you very much, Chief Secretary. Yes. Thank you. So we'll entertain questions from the forum, and yeah, I'd like us to proceed that way. Thank you so much. Mr. Charles?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me take this opportunity to thank you, Madam Chair, and the committee for inviting us to witness the session this morning, as well as to provide us with the opportunity to ask the distinguished panel of representatives from both the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank a couple of questions. Firstly, Madam Chair, I would like to ask the persons from the Ministry of Finance, because they had been suggesting in respect of the 8% that there was inadequate data which supported the contention. And of course, we heard the questions posed by the goodly senator. What I would like to ask the representatives of the Ministry of Finance, because they did indicate that they had some knowledge of the information, and therefore I would want to ask them if they had made an attempt to compute the aggregate differential, meaning the 2.7 average every year for the last 22 years, and therefore whether they have that information available, because that information would give an idea as to the quantum of funds that the Tobago's economy would have been deprived of over the last 22 years.
Yes. You tell us how much we owe Tobago.
Madam Chairman, unfortunately, I am not aware that we have quantified that information.
I would just like, Madam Chair, to advise that it is in excess of $20 billion.
Mr. Charles?
Yeah.
I think I needed senior counsel for you also. But I'm just asking to be excused for 1 minute, and Mr. De Freitas will take the chair.
Yes, Member Dial Singh.
So, Mr. Charles, falling back on that logic, if the Amerindian population in Arima decides, they say they need some sort of, financial, claims that, they were a population here and whatnot, again, do we have to work on that same logic, and say, do we give them that? So, I mean, we'll have to look at those issues also.
Mr. Charles, yes, if you have a answer.
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Chair, I note the question from the member of the committee, but I would want to think that the defining context has to do with the issue of a bill before us and the issues that are relevant to what the contents of the bill outline. And therefore, the issue that came under contention was a rationale for the 8%. And you, in your capacity as member a while ago, would have indicated the position that was articulated by the forum. And what I sought to do was to determine whether the ministry had ever done an analysis of the differential and what that possible impact would have been over the last 20 years. And indeed, I would like to proceed by reference to some other questions, if you would. I would like to ask as well whether the Ministry of Finance personnel can say to us what was the parliamentary allocation for the development program for Tobago for the last fiscal year, and what is it this year?
The permanent secretary is getting the information. Just give her a moment to acquire it.
Should I ask additional questions or I just hold?
Be pertinent to ask because they are looking for the information. So. Information, Mr. Charles. Go ahead, Permanent Secretary.
So the 2019 estimate is 231,630,000. The revised estimate for 2018 is $359,013,070.
Mr. Charles.
Thank you. I would just, for the sake of ensuring that we understand the context of the underfunding and underdevelopment of the island of Tobago, to ask whether officials here from the ministry have an idea as to what it is how much it costs to completely rehabilitate 1 kilometer of highway.
Permanent Secretary.
We don't have that information with us currently, but I'm sure it's something that we can identify.
Mr. Charles.
Just for the record, Mr. Deputy Chair, I would just like to inform all of us that we are about to rehabilitate approximately 2 kilometers of a 15 kilometers highway in Tobago. And the cost of that is $35 million. I thought that I would do that to put in perspective the challenges we have in executing our development program vis-a-vis the allocation, the development allocation that is usually provided to Tobago. And I would like to ask again, Mr. Chairman, the current Tobago House of Assembly Act does have, as part of its arrangement, the possibility of Tobago borrowing, but subject to the approval of the minister. I would like to ask the representatives of the Ministry of Finance whether they are aware if prior to last year, for example, any permission was granted by the ministry for borrowing by the Tobago House of Assembly.
Permanent Secretary.
No, I'm not aware that there was any permission granted to the THA to borrow.
And following on that, Mr. Deputy Chair, we heard an interesting interplay a while ago which involved one of the representatives of the central bank in respect of the downgrade by Moody. And therefore, as I understand it, it is not normal for a sub-sovereign governmental institution to get a higher rating than the sovereign. And what is particularly instructive is that whatever downgrade would have come to the THA as a result of the fact that we are a sovereign democratic republic, it had nothing to do with any borrowing by the Tobago House of Assembly. I think I needed to make that abundantly clear. Having said that, I would want to ask the representatives of the Ministry of Finance, whether they agree with the proposition that necessary capital accumulation.
Mr.
Is a question I'm
Charles,
asking, Chair?
I understand
Yeah.
what you're doing, but given that you're not a member of the committee, I would not be able to allow you to ask a question like that. If you have a comment on what has proceeded thus far, we'd appreciate that. And if you would like, at a later date, you can perhaps discuss it with a member of the committee and we can ask a question on your behalf. But if you have a comment, it's just in order to keep the procedure as tight as possible and along the rails of what is allowed.
I shall be guided, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you.
And in that regard, what I would like to ask is whether...
Asking a question.
Yeah, in terms of what I've heard before.
Okay.
I thought you
Go
gave
ahead.
me that prerogative, once it's in line with what would have been said and discussed.
Go ahead.
Good. Given the fact that there have been some discussion in respect of the funding for Tobago, I would like to ask the representatives of the ministry whether, in their view, they think that Tobago's development has been hindered over the years by the allocations.
Mr. Charles, I don't think it would be within the remit of the ministry to answer that question.
Shifting ground, Madam Chair, as I said, I'll be guided.
Much. Yes.
We heard the requirement or the suggestion that in respect of the bill, some policy clarifications may be needed. Could I proceed along those lines, Madam Chair?
Let me hear what you're going to say.
In that regard, I would want to suggest, Madam Chair, that the bill before us did not come out of a vacuum, but it was undergirded by philosophical, political, historical, and economic considerations and issues. And in fact, the bill is premised on that. But more than that, given some of the comments from both parties, whilst they may be useful, I would want to submit that they are basically operational policies which do not necessarily find themselves in a constitution. And I think that we needed to, make that point, Madam Chair.
Yes. Honorable Chief Secretary, I recall the chairman, on behalf of the committee, proposing that we would seek some policy clarification on several issues from the Tobago Forum, as I would call it, and that followed a request from the officials before this committee today for that clarification in order to assist them in designing the right formulae and the right approaches to finding settlement, assisting this committee to find settlement in the matters that are in the bill. So I understood it to be a request for clarification on several aspects of the thing, and we as a committee felt it would help us. And certainly, we believe it would assist the officials of the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance in being better able to advise this committee as we have invited them here to do. One of the things, just to shift a little bit, I heard from the Ministry of Finance is that they were attempting, the second speaker from the Ministry of Finance found that it might be opportune, it might be a good opportunity to allow what is in front of us to be shaped around the most current and forward-thinking best practices. so that we will not experience or replicate the weaknesses that these experts have identified in the current arrangements in Trinidad and Tobago. And as well, I heard a suggestion that, another useful suggestion. I would like to know, Chief Secretary, for the benefit of this committee, what are your thoughts on that?
I take it you're referring to the issue involving the operation of state enterprises, because I thought that was where that came from, if my memory serves. And I would like to suggest that whilst we would be quite prepared to provide you with truly much of the weaknesses that are experienced by those agencies have very little to do with what's written in the Constitution. And that was my point I was making. But really, that would refer in the most part to subsidiary legislation. But of course, that notwithstanding, given the import of this matter for us in Tobago, we would be prepared, once we get the specific questions and queries, to share our thinking with the committee.
Thank you. Mr. Charles, you wanted to make any further comments?
Not at this time, Madam Chair, so I think in essence, I was able to make some of the points I would have liked to make. I am sure opportunities we provided for me to make representation in respect of the other issues.
Any other members of the...
I'm terribly sorry, Madam Chair. A request was made, yes, by the officials of the Ministry of Finance for more thorough rationale expose into what would have informed the Tobago Forum to have arrived at the 8% that it has offered as a basis for these discussions. And in fact, I now have in my hand a copy of that rationale, which will, of course, be made available. Oh, they got it already? Right, okay, good. Thank you very kindly. So I'm happy now to refresh myself so we'll all be better informed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very, very much.
Yeah. Yeah, we have some space on the other side. Anybody else from the forum would like to make a comment? Yes, Mr. Charles. Go right ahead. You are? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to time you. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I am here. I'm so happy that the committee is going to meet with the forum of political parties in order to clarify most of the issues. So that will prevent me today from talking about those matters. But because we have before us the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank and the issues they raise, I just want to point out very quickly that most of the issues that have been raised and the questions that they have been asking, the present Tobago House of Assembly Act number 40 of 1996 made arrangement for those matters. I could give you 3 or 4 examples right now, and it appears to me that those institutions have not read that document, the Tobago House of Assembly Act. Let me just point out one. Retention of funds. Questions were raised on that. If you take the present Tobago House of Assembly Act and you read section 48 of that act, it says, let me just go quickly, just one with 3 or 4 of them, and there are several of them that would have answered the matters that have been raised here as questions. Section 48. Section 48 says this. notwithstanding Section 42 of the Exchequer and Audit Act, monies appropriated by Parliament to the fund, which is the Tobago House of Assembly Fund, for the service of a financial year, which remain unexpended at the end of that financial year, shall be retained in the fund and utilized for the purposes of capital investment. That is the present law that is in operation already in Tobago. For example, let us deal with the question of Section 51, powers, well, somebody else dealt with that. Section 49, collection of revenue. I am hearing the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance raise questions on that. And let me just look at Section 49 quickly about, and I think it's Mr. D.L. Singh, Member D.L. Singh, not this one, the other one who raised the issue. Let me just look at 49. Maybe just these 2 or 3 I will just raise, so that if we take up the present legislation that is in operation from 1996, the 11th of December to now, most of the questions that have been raised by the Ministry of Finance, they are answered there because they are actually in operation.
Mr. Charles, just 1 second. I just want to, in defense of the Ministry of Finance and of the Central Bank, I don't think they raised issues with regard to that Section 48 in terms of retention of funds, because that has been taking place over a period of time. So I don't think that should be placed on them. I do recall a question coming from a committee member with regard to the retention of funds. So it was not the witnesses. You're welcome.
Let me just say Section 49, Section 49, I think, Section 49(2) says that upon the coming into force of this act, and I think that was the question that came from Mr. D.L. Singh, any company, financial institution, or a person operating a business in Tobago shall pay in Tobago all taxes, fees, duties, levies, and other imposts in respect of its operations in Tobago. That has been so. I want to make the point about capital. There are several other issues and several other sections of the Tobago House of Assembly Act that I would not really go to now, but I heard the question about the present revenue generation potential of Tobago. And I want to mention that what we call here Tobago revenue, I've heard it, is Tobago collection, not Tobago revenue at all. Because most of Tobago's revenues are collected by the central government, contrary to even this present legislation, and kept in Trinidad. For example, WASA, they collect my taxes in Tobago. Tiantec, it comes to Trinidad, it doesn't be here. The people who pay departure tax and so on, that is collected by the Airports Authority from me in Tobago, and is put into the Trinidad Fund, is not recorded as part of the Tobago revenue. For example, I buy a new motor vehicle, and several others buy a new motor vehicle because the fact it comes through Trinidad. It's collected there, bonded in Trinidad. I am buying a new motor vehicle. All the motor vehicle taxes in respect of all these vehicles are paid in Trinidad in respect of vehicles for Tobago owned by Tobagonians. And we can go through it. So when you see revenue, it's not our potential. I would want the central bank to do this analysis and look at the present revenue generation, not the potential. You can go to that subsequently, but we must look at the present revenue generation. Custom duties. All our custom duties, we come through. There's no direct flight into Tobago coming via Caribbean Airlines and so on, and the airlines that come into the country. They come to Port of Spain. And I am traveling from Tobago. I'm from Tobago, going in back to Tobago. And I pay all my duties at Piaco. It's collected. I'm a Tobagonian coming back into the country. I am bringing in things, importing things into the country. And I pay these taxes in respect of Tobago issues in Port of Spain, in Trinidad. There's several other issues that I don't want to deal with now. I am saying that when we get the chance of meeting before the Joint Select Committee again, we will be able to go through the details of these things. Tobago revenue is not known. And I'm not talking about oil and gas. I'm talking about presently now, even tourism. They're all collected here in Trinidad, and they are calculated and recorded as Trinidad revenue while they are Tobago's. And then you look at it and say, what you call it, the rate of something to GDP, the ratio of tax to the GDP, something to the revenue to whatever it is. And it is not accurate. It is incorrect because we are not reflecting what is actually happening. We are not giving the country the truth of exactly what Tobago revenue is at the present moment. And that is one of the things that I am sure that we will be dealing with when you come to us in order to clarify these other issues. And there are several other issues of the Tobago House of Assembly Act that are actually now in operations for the last, from December 1996 to now, that is in actual operation that we are still questioning because we don't know that they do exist. Thank you very much for the opportunity just to deal with these matters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charles. Appreciated. Are there any other comments from members of the forum of political parties? Does the Chief Administrator have any comments he would like to make? No? Anybody else would like to make a comment? Dr. James, you don't want to make a comment?
Madam Chair, you're pulling my tongue. I'd like to make the observation that the revenue generating potential of Tobago will depend primarily on the type of development program we put in place over there and the scale on which it's funded. And I would like to see the central bank conduct an exercise on that without knowing what the people of Tobago want to do to share in the development opportunity of the country. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Before I ask the witnesses to leave, are there any comments from members of the committee or questions? No. Dr. Dylan Remy.
Madam Chair, thanks for allowing me to make this comment, and it follows what Mr. James just said. As we are looking at putting a bill for changing the way Tobago operates, and the potential of Tobago has not yet been seen because of what has happened historically. So indeed, it will be a guessing game for anybody to be able to do any projections on what Tobago will or can do in terms of future. It has to be based on what Tobago will be putting in place when this bill becomes an act and Tobago changes the way it operates and be able to do much better than we are doing now in terms of development. So I'm just saying it is, I was happy to hear Mr. James make that statement because it is what we are doing, what will happen is contingent on what will be put in place. And it is my, as you know, this thing has been going on for so long, since 1980, and hopefully we'll get it right this time when it's done. Comment.
We did get a comment on that from the fiscal federalism expert. who said, and if I could quote, that funds follow functions. So that is very true. But I think it would help us if we do get that issue of what has happened thus far to give us an idea of how we would move the process forward. That would help us. Thank you. Any closing comments from Finance and then from the Central Bank, please?
Madam Chairman, we have no further comments. We just thank you again for the opportunity, and we look forward to continuing to work with the committee to bring this issue to a speedy resolution.
Thank you, Central Bank.
Similarly, Madam Chair, we are happy and pleased to be part of this process, and we would like to continue to work with the committee as more information comes to hand.
Thank you very kindly. Well, at this point, I would like to thank our witnesses for being here, the members of the Ministry of Finance, the members of the Central Bank. Please let me indicate that we may need to have you back with us again. We will be making every effort to get that policy paper produced so that will help the further deliberations of the committee. So if no committee member has anything further to say, no, I'd like to thank you very much for being here and for being so forthright. We appreciate it. Thank you. At this point, the meeting is suspended whilst our guests depart.